All right, picture this. You're online, you find a new supplement, and it looks pretty promising. It's even backed by a clinical study. But then you hop on YouTube, and a popular doctor you follow is calling that very same study trash. So, who do you believe? Today, we're jumping right into that exact situation, unpacking the whole controversy around a supplement called Nitralis. This is a story about data, how it's interpreted, and what scientific credibility really means. So at the very center of this whole debate is this tiny but incredibly powerful molecule, nitric oxide. You can think of it as a gas that basically tells our blood vessels to chill out and relax, which is huge for controlling blood pressure and circulation. Here's the catch, though. As we get older, our body's ability to produce nitric oxide just plummets. And that's exactly why boosting it has become such a massive focus in the world of longevity research. And right here is where the fire starts. Dr. Brad Stanfield, who's a really well-known voice in the longevity community, opened his review of this new supplement with these words. I mean, talk about setting the stage for a major disagreement over the science. So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll get into the science of nitric oxide itself. Then we're going to put the supplement's trial on trial. We'll dig into the fierce debate over the data, the dosage, and whether just drinking juice is a better option. And finally, we'll get to the most important part, your critical takeaway, so you can make your own informed call. Okay, first up, let's talk about the star of the show, nitric oxide. Long before it was an ingredient in a supplement, its discovery was so important it actually won a Nobel Prize. The backstory here is just wild. It all started way back in the 1860s. Workers in Alfred Nobel's dynamite factories started noticing that their chest pain, their angina, would actually get better during the work week. The reason? Nitroglycerin. But it took until the 1970s for us to figure out why. It turns out it breaks down into nitric oxide in the body. I mean, this discovery was so fundamental to how we understand our entire cardiovascular system that, yep, it nabbed a Nobel Prize in 1998. And that brings us right back to the supplement at the center of this whole firestorm, Nitrilis, and the clinical trial they published to prove that it actually works. So, what did the company's trial actually find? Well, this right here was their headline result. This chart shows that after 30 days, the group taking Nitralis, that's the one on the left, had a way bigger increase in their salivary nitric oxide levels compared to the placebo group on the right. This was their proof that the supplement was effective. But they didn't stop there. The company also defined what a responder was, someone who had a significant jump in levels. And as you can see from this bar chart, they reported that over 60% of the Nitralis group were responders. Compare that to barely 12% in the placebo group. That's a five-fold difference. I mean, on paper, that looks like an absolute home run. So yeah, the company presented some pretty compelling charts. But Dr. Stanfield's argument was that these numbers weren't just misleading. He claimed they were built on a foundation of flawed science from the very start. And this is where the debate really heats up. So let's get into our first major point of conflict, the credibility of the clinical trial itself. And believe me, this is where things get really intense. Dr. Stanfield came out swinging. He didn't just dislike the study. He called the publication a trash journal. He pointed to what he saw as a massive conflict of interest. The company that makes the product also ran the study, and he flagged that it didn't have ethics approval. Now, the defense had an answer for every point. They said, look, this was a standard pilot study, and argued that under UK law, a low-risk nutritional study like this doesn't even require a formal ethics review. But here's the real scientific core of the argument. The trial measured nitric oxide in saliva. Dr. Stanfield completely dismissed this, calling it a meaningless outcome and basically a marketing gimmick. He argued it has no bearing on what's actually in your blood. The defense fired back hard on this one, saying that that view completely ignores basic human biology. They called saliva the mandatory highway for creating nitric oxide through a process known as the Enterosalivary circuit. So what on earth is this circuit? It's actually a pretty cool biological loop. When you eat nitrates, they get into your blood. Then, your salivary glands literally pull those nitrates back out of your blood and concentrate them in your saliva. Bacteria on your tongue then turn them into nitrites. You swallow that, and that's what becomes the nitric oxide your body uses. So the defense argues, if that's the process, then saliva is the perfect place to measure if it's all working. Okay, but let's just say for a minute that measuring saliva is valid. There's still another huge question. Is there even enough of the active ingredient in the supplement to make a difference? This brings us to the great dosage debate. Dr. Stanfield's next big critique really boils down to this stark contrast you're looking at: 60 milligrams versus 400 milligrams. He did the math and figured the nitrate dose in Nitralis was only about 60 mg, and he put that right up against the 400 mg or more that's been used in major clinical trials that have successfully lowered blood pressure. So, Dr. Stanfield's point is pretty simple math, right? 60 milligrams is just a tiny fraction of the dose that's been proven to work, so how could it possibly be effective? But the defense calls this a dosage fallacy. Their entire argument is that Nitralis isn't just raw nitrates, it's a fermented beet extract, which they claim is way more bioavailable than what you'd find in something like beet juice. And that word right there, bioavailability, is everything. It's not just about how much of something you take, it's about how much your body can actually absorb and put to use. The defense's whole case rests on this idea that their special fermented product is so efficient that a much smaller dose can have the exact same or maybe even a better effect. And this all leads us to the final showdown. Dr. Stanfield says the low-dose capsule is basically useless. So what's his solution? And more importantly, is that alternative even safe? Dr. Stanfield's recommendation is crystal clear. Just forget the low-dose capsules. He says if you really want the benefits, get your nitrates from whole foods like beets or from high-nitrate juices. His logic is that a tiny capsule simply can't hold enough of the raw ingredient to make a real, clinically meaningful difference. But the supplement's defenders have a very stark, very serious warning about that exact piece of advice, and they call it the oxalate reality. You see, beets and spinach, the very foods he's recommending, are incredibly high in compounds called oxalates. And the counter-argument here is a scary one. If you start chugging massive quantities of juice to try and hit that 400 milligram nitrate target, you're also flooding your kidneys with all these oxalates. This can cause sharp crystals to form, leading to a dangerous condition called acute oxalate nephropathy, and that can cause sudden, severe kidney failure. So after all that, the back and forth, the arguments, who's actually right? Well, the goal here isn't for me to declare a winner. It's to give you the tools you need to think critically about any health claim you come across. This entire controversy really boils down to a few critical questions you should always be asking. Who paid for and conducted the research? What did they actually measure? Was it a real-world health outcome or just a proxy? How does the dose compare to what independent science says works? And, this is a big one, what are the potential hidden dangers of the so-called better alternatives? In the end, we're left with this really fundamental question. When you have a peer-reviewed study on one side and a detailed takedown from a respected doctor on the other, and they're both using science to back up their claims, who do you trust? It just goes to show that, ultimately, you are the one who gets the final say on the decisions you make for your own health.